Tonight, we journey back over 2,000 years, not to marble columns or battlefields, but to misty mountains, bamboo groves, and philosophers who thought the best way to live was to stop trying so hard. The Taoists, sages of flow, paradox, and occasionally turning into butterflies in their dreams, shaped a wisdom that feels less like a lecture and more like a gentle nudge to breathe. Imagine a world where kingdoms collapsed, rulers plotted, and yet Taoist thinkers calmly wrote poems about water dripping on stone or the usefulness of an empty cup. While everyone else argued about power and control, they asked a strange question. What if the secret to life is not holding tighter, but letting go? This is not just dusty scrolls for robe-wearing hermits. It is practical, playful, and surprisingly relevant. From Laozi quietly slipping away on the back of a water buffalo, to Zhuangzi wondering if he was a man or a butterfly, their wisdom shows us how to loosen our grip when the world demands we squeeze harder. They remind us that softness can outlast hardness, that stillness can reveal clarity, and that sometimes the best action is no action at all. So, before you dismiss this as mountain monk daydreaming, consider this. The Taoists had a way of handling chaos, stress, and uncertainty without turning life into an endless grind. And in a world where our battles are traffic jams, inbox overloads, and phones that never stop buzzing, their lessons might be exactly what we need. Like the video, subscribe. Because tonight, we uncover the Taoist way and learn how ancient wisdom can turn the storms of life into something we can float through, one breath, one step, and one flow at a time. Imagine holding a block of wood in your hand, untouched, unshaped, and perfectly simple. It has not been carved into a statue. It has not been cut into furniture. It has not been polished to impress anyone. It is plain, ordinary, and yet it carries a hidden power. In Taoist thought, this image is called Pu, the uncarved block, and it represents a way of living that feels both strange and deeply natural. It is a reminder that before society cuts us into shapes, before ambition and fear sculpt us into something else, we are whole just as we are. Think of how children move through the world. Their laughter is not rehearsed, their curiosity is not forced, and their questions come from a place that does not worry about being right or wrong. They are like the uncarved block, fresh and open. As we grow older, we begin to compare, to chase, to polish ourselves in ways that sometimes hide who we really are. Taoism invites us to return to that first state, to notice that the simplicity we lost never truly disappeared. It is still within us, waiting to be uncovered. In ancient China, over 2,000 years ago, sages like Laozi spoke of this simplicity as the way. They described the Tao as the flow of life itself, a river that carries all things without effort. The uncarved block was their symbol for living in harmony with that flow. It was not about being lazy or careless, but about refusing to let fear and desire shape us into something unnatural. When you try to control water, it slips through your fingers, but when you let it flow, it carves valleys and nourishes the earth. The same is true with life. The image of the uncarved block has followed humanity for centuries because it is more than just a metaphor. It is a mirror. When we look at it, we see ourselves, before we were told who we had to be, before we carved ourselves into the roles of student, worker, or leader. This does not mean we should throw away all structure, but it does mean that freedom lies in remembering the raw material that came first. Taoist wisdom suggests that the more we strip away the layers of striving, the closer we come to the truth of who we are. Picture a candle flickering in a silent room, shadows stretching across the walls. In that quiet, the mind settles and the heart beats steadily. This is the space of the uncarved block, a place where you do not need to prove anything, where the world feels whole without decoration. It is fragile but powerful, soft yet enduring, and it speaks to something every person feels deep down. So, the journey begins here, with simplicity. It begins not with action but with letting go, not with striving but with trust. The uncarved block asks us to pause, to notice, and to allow life to flow as it is meant to. It is the first step into the Taoist way, a return to what has always been waiting within us, quiet, clear, and whole. Stand at the edge of a wide river and try to describe it with words. You might say, it is deep. You might say, it is calm. You might even try to capture its beauty by calling it shining or powerful. Yet, no matter what you say, the river itself remains beyond your description. It continues flowing whether you speak or stay silent. This is the puzzle Laozi placed at the beginning of the Tao Te Ching, when he wrote that the Tao that can be spoken is not the constant Tao. From the very first line, he warned us that language can only point. It can never fully capture the mystery of the way. Imagine someone trying to describe the taste of an orange to a person who has never seen one. Words might paint the color, the sweetness, the sharpness of the juice, but until the person bites into it, they will never truly know. The Tao is like this. It is the living experience of being in the world, the quiet order behind every leaf that grows and every star that burns. To think we can trap it in words is like trying to hold the river in your hand. This idea is both frustrating and freeing. It frustrates because humans have always believed in the power of language. We argue, we explain, we write, we debate. We trust that if we can just find the right words, we can own the truth. Laozi reminds us that truth is bigger than words. At the same time, it is freeing because it allows us to step back from the need to define everything. It gives us permission to be silent and to see the world as it is rather than as our mind tries to label it. Think of how easily labels can trap us. A person might be called smart or foolish, strong or weak, and yet, in reality, they are far more complex than any single word. A tree might be called useful or useless, depending on whether it provides fruit, yet in the forest it provides shelter, air, and beauty. Words simplify, but they also cut away the vastness of reality. Laozi invites us to hold language lightly, to use it as a guide but never as a prison. By starting his book with this paradox, Laozi created a doorway into humility. He tells us not to worship words, not to cling to explanations, but to approach life with wonder. When you stand at the water's edge, you do not need to capture it in a sentence. You can simply watch the current, listen to its song, and feel the mystery it carries. That is already enough. The lesson of Tao Ke Tao is not to abandon language, but to recognize its limits. Use words, but know they are only tools. They point toward the way, but are never the way itself. Like a finger pointing at the moon, if you only stare at the finger, you miss the moon entirely. The Tao asks us to look beyond words, to open our eyes to the flowing reality that no voice can ever completely contain. The story begins with a man on a journey, an old sage riding slowly on the back of a water buffalo. His name was Laozi, and legend says that in the 6th century before the Common Era, he reached the western part of China, the edge of the known world. Tired of politics, tired of noise, tired of watching people chase power and wealth, as if these were the measure of life, he decided to leave civilization behind. The guards at the pass stopped him and begged him not to go. They knew he carried wisdom that could vanish forever if he disappeared into the wilderness. So they asked him to write it down before he departed. There, in a quiet place, he wrote a small book, only around 5,000 characters, a collection of short verses that flowed like water and carried the mystery of the universe in their rhythm. That book became the Tao Te Ching, a text that would survive for over 2,000 years and shape the way people understood nature, leadership, and the self. When he was finished, he handed the scroll to the guard, mounted his buffalo, and vanished into the unknown. He never returned, and no one knows where he went. This moment, half history and half myth, captures the heart of Taoist wisdom. Laozi did not cling to fame or legacy. He did not try to control how his words would be used. He let go, trusting the Tao to carry his teaching where it needed to go. His departure was as important as his writing, for it showed that wisdom is not about staying at the center of attention, but about following the flow of life, wherever it leads. Imagine walking away from everything you know. The city behind you is full of ambition and struggle, but ahead lies the open road, the mountains, and the silence of the natural world. It takes courage to step into that silence. Laozi's choice teaches that sometimes letting go is the highest form of strength. It is not weakness to leave behind what does not nourish you. It is trust in something larger than yourself. The Western Pass stands as a symbol of transition, a place where the world of human rules meets the vastness of the unknown. By writing the Tao Te Ching there, Laozi placed his wisdom at the threshold between society and wilderness. It was as if to say, the Tao is not confined to palaces or courts. It belongs equally to rivers, forests, and stars. His act of departure turned the edge of the empire into the beginning of a greater journey. Laozi's story continues to inspire because it touches a truth we all feel. There comes a moment when the noise of the world becomes too heavy, when our hearts long for something simpler and more real. To let go, to walk away, is not to abandon life, but to return to it. The sage at the Western Pass reminds us that the way is not found by clinging to the crowd, but by trusting the path that opens when we step into the silence beyond. One night, in ancient China, a philosopher named Zhuangzi had a dream. In the dream, he was not himself. He was a butterfly, drifting gently on the wind, light and free, with no worries about the world. When he awoke, he was startled. Was he Zhuangzi who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or was he a butterfly now dreaming of being Zhuangzi? This simple question carried a mystery so deep that it has echoed across centuries. The story is playful, but it unsettles everything we think we know about identity. We assume we are solid, fixed, and certain, yet in that moment, Zhuangzi revealed that who we are may not be as clear as we believe. Dreams blur into waking life, and waking life sometimes feels like a dream. The sharp boundary between one and the other begins to soften. That softening is not meant to confuse us, but to set us free. Think of the way people cling to labels. We say this person is wise, that one foolish, this one rich, that one poor. But what if these labels are just like the dream, temporary states that shift depending on where you stand? A butterfly in flight cannot see itself the way we see it. Perhaps we too are more than what we appear. Zhuangzi used humor and paradox to loosen the grip of certainty and to remind us that the world is wider than our definitions. The butterfly dream is not only about personal identity, it also opens a door to freedom. When we stop clinging to fixed categories, we begin to flow with change. Zhuangzi lived during a time of conflict, the 4th century before the Common Era, when schools of thought battled for dominance. While others argued about who was right, Zhuangzi laughed and told stories of talking trees, useless animals, and fish leaping in joy. He showed that the truth is not something to trap, but something to dance with. In our own time, the butterfly dream still speaks. We live in a world where we are constantly told who to be, how to act, what role to play. Yet, inside each of us is a fluttering reminder that we are more than one thing. At different times of life, we shift and change, and perhaps that is the point. The butterfly does not worry about permanence, it only moves with the breeze. The story leaves us with a question, rather than an answer. Are we the dreamer or the dreamed? Maybe both, maybe neither. What matters is not solving the puzzle, but living with its wonder. Zhuangzi's butterfly shows that freedom arrives when we stop forcing the world into rigid lines. Like wings brushing the air, light and fleeting, life becomes easier when we let it flow, when we trust that identity is not a prison, but a mystery we are free to explore. Picture a river winding its way through valleys and mountains. A boat drifts on its surface, carried not by frantic paddling, but by the strength of the current itself. The boat moves swiftly and smoothly because it does not fight the water. This image is at the heart of the Taoist idea called wu wei, often translated as effortless action. At first, it may sound like laziness, but it is not about doing nothing. It is about learning to act in harmony with the world so that our effort joins with the flow of life instead of struggling against it. Think of times in your own life when things seemed to fall into place without strain, a conversation that unfolded naturally, a decision that felt obvious, a game where your movements seemed perfectly timed. That ease is Wu Wei. It is the opposite of forcing. Forcing is trying to bend life into your plan no matter what. Wu Wei is sensing the moment, seeing the opening, and stepping into it with grace. In ancient China, this idea shaped everything from politics to poetry. Laozi wrote that the best rulers govern by doing less, letting the people find their own order instead of drowning them with control. Poets and artists followed the same path, letting ink flow like water across the page, rather than fighting to control every stroke. Martial artists practiced by yielding instead of resisting, turning the strength of an opponent into their own advantage. In each case, Wu Wei meant trust, timing, and attunement. The difference between effort and effortless effort is subtle. A musician can practice scales for years, but when they step onto the stage and truly play, the notes flow without strain. The hours of practice vanish into the background, and the music feels alive, spontaneous, free. That is Wu Wei. It does not reject discipline, but it reminds us that discipline serves the moment. It should not strangle it. When we are attuned, action arises naturally. This idea challenges the modern obsession with constant striving. We are told to push harder, grind longer, and hustle without rest. Wu Wei whispers a different truth. Sometimes the most powerful move is to pause. Sometimes wisdom is in waiting until the right moment arrives instead of forcing a door that is not ready to open. It is the skill of seeing the currents beneath the surface and letting them carry you forward. Water has always been the Taoist teacher of Wu Wei. It does not resist, yet it wears down rock. It does not boast, yet it fills the lowest places and nourishes life everywhere. To live like water is to trust that gentleness can be strong, that patience can be powerful, and that yielding is not weakness, but wisdom. Wu Wei is not an escape from responsibility. It is a reminder that true strength does not always come from pushing harder, but from knowing when to flow. Like the boat on the river, we move best when we let go of the frantic struggle and discover the quiet skill of effortless action. If you drop water on stone, it seems like nothing at all. The drop is soft, the stone is hard, and, at first glance, the stone appears eternal while the water looks fragile. Yet, if you wait, if you watch the drops fall year after year, you will see the stone begin to change. Tiny grooves form, then deeper lines, until the water has shaped what once seemed unshakable. This is the Taoist lesson that softness overcomes hardness. It is not a trick of strength, but the quiet power of patience, persistence, and flexibility. Bamboo carries the same message. In a storm trees, with rigid trunks often snap, but bamboo bends and sways with the wind. It yields without breaking, and when the storm passes it rises again unharmed. What looks weak is actually strong. What appears fragile is in truth and resilient. This is the kind of strength the Tao teaches, a strength that does not boast but endures. The image of water was used again and again in the Tao Te Ching because it embodies this paradox perfectly. Water is soft enough to slip through your fingers, but strong enough to carve canyons. It does not fight, yet it triumphs. It flows into low places that others avoid, and in doing so, it nourishes life. When Laozi said the soft overcomes the hard, he was pointing to this hidden strength, the power that comes not from resistance, but from flowing with what island. In our daily lives, we often believe we must be hard to survive. We brace ourselves against challenges. We put up walls. We refuse to bend. But hardness can make us brittle. Taoism invites us to practice softness instead. This does not mean giving up or being passive. It means adapting, adjusting, and responding with openness instead of force. A person who is soft in this way is not easily broken. History shows this wisdom too. Empires rise with rigid laws and military might, yet over time their hardness makes them unable to adapt. They crumble while the quieter traditions of poetry, art, and philosophy continue flowing across generations. In personal life, the same truth can be felt. Anger, pride, and stubbornness may look powerful in the moment, but kindness, patience, and flexibility often have the greater effect. The lesson of softness can feel uncomfortable because it goes against our instincts to fight back. But think of the moments when a gentle word calmed anger more effectively than shouting ever could, or when waiting patiently brought the result that force could not achieve. These are small glimpses of how the soft overcomes the hard. The river does not rush to prove itself. It simply flows, and in flowing it shapes the land. Bamboo does not resist the wind. It bends, and by bending it survives. The Tao teaches that we too can carry this strength. To be soft is not to be weak. It is to hold within us the quiet power of water, a power that endures storms and carves valleys, patient, steady, and unstoppable. A wheel spins because of its hub, but the hub itself is empty. A clay pot holds water because the center has been shaped into a hollow. A room shelters people because of the space inside, not because of the walls alone. Lao Tzu used these images to remind us that emptiness is not nothingness. It is the source of usefulness. What we often ignore or overlook, the space in between, is what gives life its true capacity. We are trained to value what can be seen and touched, the clay, the wood, the walls, the furniture. Yet, Taoist wisdom flips this view. The emptiness is just as important, perhaps more so. Without the hollow of the pot, the clay is only a lump. Without the open space of the room, the walls are useless. Emptiness is what makes form meaningful. This truth stretches beyond objects. Consider the pauses in music. A song is not only a stream of notes. It is the silence between them that gives rhythm and breath. Without the pause, there is no flow, only noise. Or think of a conversation. If no one ever stops to listen, if silence is never allowed, words lose their meaning. It is the gap that allows connection. In life, we often fill ourselves to the brim with tasks, plans, and worries. We believe that being full is being complete, but fullness without space can suffocate. Taoism teaches the opposite, that letting go creates room for newness, for flow, for possibility. Just as the pot must be empty to carry water, we too must allow emptiness in our lives if we wish to be open. Imagine walking into a room with bare walls, sunlight spilling across the floor, and nothing else. The space feels alive, filled with potential. Now imagine a room so crowded with objects that you cannot move freely. The first invites calm, the second creates tension. This is not only about houses, it is about the heart and the mind. A mind crammed with noise leaves no space for peace. A heart filled with clinging leaves no room for love. Lao Tzu's teaching is simple but radical. Value emptiness. See its power. When we stop fearing the absence of things, we begin to discover a deeper presence. The pause, the silence, the hollow, these are not losses but gifts. They are the spaces where life breathes. In a world that pushes constant action and endless noise, it can feel strange to step back and honor emptiness. Yet when you do, you find that emptiness is not a void, but a doorway. It is the opening through which creativity, peace, and meaning flow. The hub of the wheel, the hollow of the pot, the space of the room, all remind us that letting go does not take away. It gives us capacity, a quiet strength that turns nothing into everything. In the centuries, known as the Warring States of China, the land was torn apart by ambition. Kingdoms clashed, rulers demanded loyalty, and armies filled the fields with endless battles. The air was thick with strategy and suspicion. It was in this chaos that Taoist voices spoke of a different kind of power, one that did not rely on swords or strict laws, but on a softer, quieter form of leadership. They described the sage king, a ruler who governs not by force, but by allowing the natural order of life to guide the people. The idea sounds impossible in a time of war. How could a ruler step back when enemies pressed at every border? Yet the Taoists believed that the more a leader interfered, the more disorder followed. To control everything was to invite resistance. To trust the flow of life was to let harmony emerge by itself. Just as a farmer cannot pull at the stalks of rice to make them grow faster, a wise ruler cannot force people into virtue. Growth must come from the ground, not from the hand that clutches it too tightly. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi described rulers who were so gentle in their governance that the people barely noticed they were there. The highest form of rule, he wrote, is when people say, "We did it ourselves." This was not weakness but wisdom. By stepping aside, by trusting, the sage king allowed spontaneous order to appear. Villages organized, families supported one another, and life flourished not because of endless commands, but because space was given for it to happen naturally. During the Warring States, such ideas were mocked by those who worshipped military power and strict law. Legalist thinkers argued that people were selfish and needed harsh rules to behave. But Taoism answered differently. People, like water, flow best when not blocked. They may stumble, but given trust they often find balance on their own. To rule with a light touch was not to abandon responsibility, but to recognize the deeper patterns that already held society together. Even today, this vision carries weight. We see leaders who cling to control, who fill every space with their authority, and yet the more they grip, the more chaos grows. The Taoist image of the sage king reminds us that leadership can also be quiet. It can be about creating conditions where people thrive rather than demanding obedience. It can be about guiding without pushing, listening instead of shouting. The wars of ancient China eventually forged empires, but the Taoist wisdom endured. It whispered that power does not need to be loud. True strength may come from trust, from restraint, from letting life find its own order. Amid the clash of armies and the roar of ambition, the vision of the sage king was like water flowing through cracks in the battlefield, soft but unstoppable, offering a different path for those willing to listen. High in the mountains of China stories tell of immortals who wandered among the clouds. These figures were not gods in the distant heavens, but human beings who had learned to live in such harmony with the Tao that their lives stretched beyond ordinary limits. They were said to ride cranes through the sky, to sip dew instead of wine, to laugh freely as they drifted between peaks. Whether or not they truly existed was less important than what they represented. They were symbols of the Taoist dream of aligning body and spirit with the flow of nature so fully that death itself seemed less of an ending and more of a transformation. The path toward this harmony was often described through the practice of inner alchemy. Unlike the outer alchemists who sought to turn metal into gold, the inner alchemists turned their attention inward, refining the hidden energies of the body. They spoke of Jing, Qi, and Shen. Jing was the essence, the raw vitality of the body. Qi was the breath, the energy that moved through every channel of life. Shen was the spirit, the clarity of mind and heart. To cultivate these three was to shape the body into a landscape where mountains, rivers, and skies mirrored the universe itself. Breath became the first doorway. Taoist masters taught that a shallow breath ties the mind in knots, while a deep, slow breath unravels those knots and allows calm to rise. Sitting in stillness, inhaling softly, exhaling gently, one begins to sense the subtle currents within. The chest loosens, the heart steadies, and the mind clears like a lake after the wind stops stirring its surface. This was the beginning of nourishing life, not by forcing, but by returning to simplicity. Stillness was not idleness. It was the attentive resting of the body so that deeper rhythms could be felt. In the quiet, a practitioner could imagine rivers of qi flowing through the body's meridians, mountains forming in the bones, forests growing in the breath. The body was not seen as a machine, but as a living landscape, part of the greater Tao. To care for this inner world was to align with the outer world, to find unity between self and cosmos. The goal of inner alchemy was not immortality in the way we might think today, of endless years and unbroken time. It was about transformation, about becoming light and free, about letting go of the grasping that wears life down. When the ancients spoke of immortals, they spoke of those who had released fear and desire, who had learned to live so gently with the Tao that life itself felt infinite. In a world obsessed with control and achievement, the story of inner alchemy feels like a whisper from another time. It tells us that to nourish life, we must loosen our grip. Breath by breath, stillness by stillness, we refine the essence, the energy, and the spirit. We may never ride cranes across the sky, but we can taste something of that freedom each time we let go and allow life to flow through us. Step into an ancient Chinese scroll painting, and you will find yourself surrounded by towering mountains, drifting mists, and rivers winding into the distance. These images were not just decoration. They were expressions of the Taoist way of seeing the world, a vision of nature that invited the viewer to enter and wander. The brushstrokes were delicate yet bold, shaping peaks and valleys with just enough detail to suggest form while leaving much to the imagination. The spaces left blank, the wide swaths of mist, were as important as the lines themselves. This use of emptiness reflected the Taoist idea that what is not shown can be more powerful than what island. In these paintings, mountains often rose high into the sky, their ridges vanishing into clouds. Humans, if they appeared at all, were tiny figures walking along paths or drifting in boats, small beside the vastness of nature. The message was clear: the world is immense, and people are only one part of its flow. To look at such a painting was to be reminded of humility, of our place within a greater pattern, of the Tao itself stretching beyond what eyes can see. The negative space of the mist was not accidental. It was the artist's way of showing wu-wei in visual form. Just as water flows around obstacles and wind passes through valleys, the painter allowed the brush to pause, to stop, to let silence speak on the paper. The emptiness became the mist that shrouded peaks, the air that gave the scene breath. It was a reminder that the unseen is as real as the seen, that mystery gives shape to reality. The viewer's eye was never forced into a single perspective. Instead, the paintings invited wandering. You might follow a path up the mountainside, then drift with the river, then pause in the fog, shifting from one vantage to another. This wandering gaze reflected the Taoist spirit of exploration and ease. Life, too, is not a single straight line, but a journey of shifting perspectives. To appreciate the art was to practice letting go of control, to allow the scene to guide you rather than forcing your will upon it. These landscapes were more than art, they were cosmology. They expressed a belief that mountains, rivers, mists, and skies were alive, connected, and filled with Tao. Painting them was not about copying nature exactly, but about capturing its rhythm and spirit. Each brushstroke was a meditation, a way of tuning the heart to the vast flow of the world. To look upon them centuries later is to feel that same quiet rhythm, to sense the pulse of mountains and the softness of drifting fog. In a world crowded with noise and speed, the old scrolls still whisper. They invite us to step into their landscapes, to lose ourselves in the mist, to wander among peaks without hurry. In their silence we find space, in their emptiness we find meaning, and in their flowing lines we glimpse the Taoist way, where mountains, mists, and ink reveal the unity of nature and spirit. Under the quiet glow of the moon, poets once lifted their cups and let their words flow like rivers. Among them was Li Bai, a man whose verses sparkled with laughter, longing, and wine. He often wrote of gazing at the moon, drinking deeply, and feeling his spirit drift beyond the limits of daily life. His intoxication was more than a taste of alcohol. It was a way of loosening the grip of control, of letting thought dissolve so that the heart could move with the rhythm of nature. In his poems, the moon was a companion, the mountains were friends, and the river was a mirror of his soul. Another great poet of that age was Wang Wei, quieter and more meditative. While Li Bai soared on the wings of intoxication, Wang Wei listened to the silence between breaths. His poems were filled with images of bamboo groves, empty halls, and streams flowing in the shadows. Reading his verses is like sitting in a temple courtyard at dusk, where stillness itself becomes a kind of music. Both poets revealed the Taoist way through different paths, one through wild joy and the other through quiet calm. Nature was never just background in their poetry, it was a mirror of the mind. When the moon shone bright in the night sky, it reflected the clear heart of the poet. When clouds drifted and shadows deepened, it revealed a mind filled with questions and restlessness. The world outside was not separate from the self, but part of the same flow. By describing landscapes and seasons, they were also describing the turning of thought, the shifting of mood, the mystery of existence itself. The image of intoxication has often been misunderstood as mere excess, but for Li Bai it was a metaphor for release. To be drunk under the moon was to let go of calculation, ambition, and fear. It was to return, if only for a night, to the uncarved block of being, whole and free. For Wang Wei, silence and meditation offered the same release. He loosened control not through wine, but through stillness, allowing the Tao to shape his vision. Both paths pointed to the same truth, that freedom arises when we stop clutching so tightly to ourselves. Centuries later, their poems still carry this power. When you read Li Bai, you feel the laughter of rivers and the sparkle of stars. When you read Wang Wei, you feel the hush of pines and the weight of mist. Together, they remind us that life can be both playful and serene, that letting go does not always mean retreat, but can mean stepping fully into the present moment. To walk under the moonlight with their verses is to join a timeless company. The cup in your hand might be empty or full, the path before you silent or crowded, but the poetry invites you to see the world with fresh eyes. In their words, intoxication and meditation meet, and through them we glimpse the Taoist way of ease, where nature and mind reflect one another in the silver light of night. Step into a Taoist garden, and you do not find neat lines or rigid order. Instead, you discover winding paths that lead you not straight ahead but sideways, turning corners, inviting pauses, asking you to wander instead of rush. Rocks stand like miniature mountains, water reflects the sky in shifting ripples, and trees bend naturally with no attempt to force them into shape. The garden feels alive because it is not about control, but about creating a space where chance and flow can meet. The placement of every element may look casual, yet it is carefully considered. A stone is tilted so that shadows fall differently in morning and evening. A pond is shaped to mirror the clouds above, making the heavens part of the landscape. Bridges curve instead of stretch in straight lines, slowing the step of the traveller so that they notice each view. This design is Taoist in spirit because it guides without commanding, offering freedom while gently shaping attention. Asymmetry is one of the garden's quiet secrets. In many cultures, balance is shown through perfect symmetry, but Taoism finds beauty in unevenness. A tall rock may stand beside a low one. A thick tree may grow next to open space. A winding stream may split into smaller rivulets. These contrasts create harmony, not through sameness, but through difference. Just as life is never perfectly balanced, yet still holds together, the garden reminds us that unevenness can be its own form of perfection. Water plays the role of teacher in these spaces, sometimes still as glass, sometimes flowing swiftly. It shows how softness shapes the scene. A stone placed where water falls slowly becomes carved and smooth. A pond filled with fish creates ripples that constantly redraw the reflection of the world above. In this way, the garden becomes a moving painting, never the same twice, reminding us that change itself is part of beauty. Walking through such a place is more than sightseeing, it is practice. The twists of the path train the mind to slow down. The shadows and light invite you to notice what is usually ignored. The rocks and water suggest mountains and rivers far beyond the garden walls, expanding the imagination. In every detail, the space teaches quiet attention, the ability to be fully present without forcing thought. These gardens were built not as escapes from life, but as reminders of how to live within it. They whisper that harmony comes from respecting the natural flow of things. By shaping a space that honors chance, shadow, and winding paths, Taoist artists created mirrors of the Tao itself. Even today, when we step into such places, we feel their calm. We walk more slowly, breathe more deeply, and see more clearly. A garden of quiet attention does not demand that we change. It simply opens a path where we can let go, wander, and rediscover the ease that lies in flowing with the world as its island. In the stillness of dawn, a student of Taiji stands in a courtyard. The air is cool, the world quiet, and the body begins to move in slow, deliberate circles. Arms flow like water, feet glide as though tracing clouds. What appears gentle is in truth a discipline of immense power. The ancient masters called it the art of yielding, of meeting force not with greater force but with softness so refined that strength is redirected and dissolved. This was the lesson of the reed and the sword. Imagine a storm sweeping across a field. The sword is rigid, gleaming, and proud, but it risks breaking under the pressure of wind and rain. The reed, by contrast, bends low, sways with the storm, and then rises again when calm returns. Taiji takes its inspiration from this softness. The practitioner does not resist directly, but turns, yields, and allows the opponent's strength to pass harmlessly by. What looks like retreat becomes strategy. What feels like surrender becomes victory. The secret lies in relaxation, though not the lazy kind. Muscles loosen, joints open, and tension melts away. But beneath this softness lies awareness as sharp as lightning. The body listens. When a push arrives, it yields just enough to neutralize it, then circles back with energy borrowed from the attacker's own force. This is why Taiji is often called an internal martial art. The battlefield is not only the clash of limbs, but the balance of mind and breath. Yielding is not weakness, it is responsiveness. When one stiffens against an attack, the body becomes predictable and brittle. When one relaxes into the moment, every movement becomes alive with possibility. The hands can deflect, the feet can step aside, the whole body can shift like water, finding its path around a rock. To watch a skilled master is to witness someone who seems untouchable, not because they overpower, but because they cannot be pinned down. The Taoist roots of these arts are clear. They teach that softness overcomes hardness, that stillness conceals motion, and that patience often outlasts aggression. Each form practiced slowly in the morning is not just an exercise for the body, but a lesson for life. To yield in conversation, to redirect anger with calm, to bend under pressure without breaking, these are the hidden applications of the art. The reed and the sword live in every argument, every struggle, every challenge of daily life. As the student in the courtyard finishes the sequence, the rising sun casts long shadows across the ground. The body feels both strong and light, the mind alert yet calm. The lesson has seeped beyond the courtyard walls. In the softness of the reed lies a resilience the sword can never match. In learning to yield, one discovers the true strength that flows from the Tao, a strength born not of domination but of harmony with the endless currents of life. In a mountain monastery, the wind moves through bamboo groves, carrying with it the faint sound of bells and the hush of robes brushing against stone. The monks sit quietly, some in meditation halls, others walking slowly along narrow paths. No words are exchanged, yet teaching flows through the silence. This is the spirit of Chan in China and Zen in Japan, a way of practice deeply shaped by Taoist currents. It is a path where wisdom does not always come from scriptures or debates, but from a glance, a gesture, or the sound of wind moving freely through the trees. At the heart of this tradition lies the idea of wordless teaching. A master might raise a finger, strike a stone, or simply remain silent, and in that moment the student is invited to awaken. It is not that words are useless, but that they can only point. The truth they hint at is too vast to be caught in phrases. Taoist thought had long taught that the Tao, which can be spoken, is not the eternal Tao, and Chan inherited this reverence for silence. The lesson is that wisdom is not in explaining but in experiencing, not in capturing but in releasing. Spontaneity also runs through these teachings. A monk might laugh suddenly in the middle of meditation or answer a question with something that seems unrelated. These gestures are not random, but alive, flowing like water that takes the shape of whatever it meets. Taoism valued this responsiveness, the ability to act without clinging or calculation, and Chan transformed it into a method of awakening. To move without hesitation, to speak without rehearsing, to live without constantly grasping for control. This is the freedom they called the way of no mind. No mind does not mean emptiness in the sense of being blank or dull. It means clarity. It is like a mirror that reflects everything yet clings to nothing. Thoughts arise and fade like clouds drifting across the sky. Feelings come and go like waves upon a shore. In this clarity, there is ease, a lightness that does not deny the world but allows one to move through it with grace. Taoist sages had long praised water for its ability to flow without resistance, and Zen echoed this by teaching that the mind too should flow, clear and unburdened. Stories from this tradition often seem puzzling at first. A student asks a master about enlightenment, and the master points to a cypress tree swaying in the courtyard. Another asks for a sermon, and the master simply holds up a flower. These moments are not riddles to be solved, but invitations to drop analysis and meet reality directly. Just as Taoist painters left blank spaces in their scrolls to let the mind wander, Zen masters left gaps in words to let the spirit awaken. As the wind continues through the bamboo, the teaching is everywhere. It is in the rustle of leaves, the stillness of breath, the sudden laugh of a monk sweeping the courtyard. In these echoes of Taoist thought, Chan and Zen remind us that awakening is not far away or hidden in complex theories. It is here, in the immediacy of this moment, waiting to be seen with a mind as clear as flowing water. In a quiet room with wooden screens and the faint scent of herbs hanging in the air, a physician of old China would sit with a patient, not rushing, not commanding, but listening. The art of medicine in this tradition was never about conquering illness in battle. It was about harmony, about finding the places where the body's flow had been disrupted and helping it return to balance. The doctor was not a general ordering troops, but a gardener guiding water, sunlight, and soil so that life could flourish again. At the center of this practice was the flow of qi, the subtle energy that moved through channels within the body, much like rivers through a landscape. When qi moved smoothly, health was strong. When it stagnated or scattered, sickness appeared. The task of the physician was to notice these hidden patterns. Diagnosis was not just about symptoms, but about listening to the pulse, observing the skin, hearing the tone of the voice, and sensing the mood of the spirit. Each detail was a clue, and together they revealed how the currents of life were moving within. Treatment was rarely harsh. Acupuncture needles were placed so lightly they barely touched the skin, like whispers guiding the flow of energy back into harmony. Herbal formulas were blended not to overwhelm, but to nudge, combining roots, leaves, and minerals in careful proportion. Even food was considered medicine, each flavor warming or cooling, strengthening or dispersing. The aim was never domination but support, restoring balance rather than forcing change. This gentle approach reflected the Taoist view of the body as part of nature itself. Just as rivers can be guided by opening channels or redirecting flow, the body could be healed by subtle shifts that encouraged its own vitality to rise again. A good doctor was like a farmer who knew when to prune and when to wait, when to water and when to let the rain fall. It was a dance with the Tao rather than a fight against disease. Patients, too, were part of this balance. Healing was not passive but participatory. Rest, breath, movement, and mindfulness were woven into the treatment. Practices like Qigong and meditation helped align body and spirit, teaching people to cultivate their own harmony rather than depend only on medicine from outside. Health was not defined as the absence of illness, but as the presence of flow, the ease of living in tune with the rhythms of nature. Even today, when we look back at these ancient methods, we can sense their wisdom. They remind us that healing does not always mean force or control. Sometimes it means slowing down, listening carefully, and giving space for the body to restore itself. The medicine of harmony whispers a lesson as old as the Tao itself. Life flows best when we stop trying to master it and instead learn how to guide it gently, allowing balance to return like water finding its course back to the sea. Everywhere today, people are told to improve themselves. Work harder, be fitter, think smarter, achieve more. The message is constant, a drumbeat that never stops. But beneath this endless striving lies exhaustion, a sense that no matter how much is done, it is never enough. Taoist thought offers a different path, one that sounds almost shocking to ears trained on ambition. It whispers that the way forward is not constant self-improvement, but letting go, not forcing growth, but discovering the sufficiency already present. This is the paradox of trying not to try. The more one strains to be effortless, the further away effortlessness slips. Like water in the hand, grasping too tightly causes it to escape. The Taoist sage points instead to the practice of release. Stop gripping so hard. Stop measuring worth against an impossible image of perfection. In the stillness that follows, one begins to notice that much of what was sought is already here. The tree does not wake each morning worried about becoming taller. The river does not push itself to flow faster. They become themselves simply by being. The grim project of perfection is heavy because it is built on the belief that who you are is not enough. Yet Taoism teaches that the uncarved block holds infinite potential without needing polish. A person does not need to chase worth through endless striving, but can return to simplicity, to the original wholeness that exists before comparison. This does not mean laziness. It means trust, allowing natural growth rather than forcing artificial shape. When the mind quiets its constant demands, something surprising arises. Actions flow with more ease. Decisions feel less tangled. Joy appears not as a reward for success, but as a companion in ordinary moments. The paradox resolves itself. By dropping the obsession with self-improvement, one finds a kind of improvement that feels lighter and truer. It is not about becoming someone else, but about relaxing into who one already island. This lesson appears in stories of ancient Taoist masters who lived far from courts and markets. They did not measure their lives by fame or accomplishment. They wandered mountains, wrote poems, tended small gardens, and laughed with friends. Their lives remind us that sufficiency is not hidden in distant goals, but in the present moment when pressure is released. The sage is not perfect, but whole, not flawless, but free. In a culture that worships progress, these ideas may seem naive. Yet even science shows the cost of relentless striving. Stress erodes health, comparison fuels anxiety, and perfectionism can paralyze rather than inspire. To let go of self-improvement is not to give up on growth, but to redefine it. Growth becomes natural unfolding, like bamboo rising from the earth without demand. The Taoist way tells us that life is not a ladder to climb, but a river to join. Letting go of the weight of perfection, we begin to float. And in that gentle drifting, we discover a truth both simple and profound. We were never lacking. We were always enough. In the old texts of the Tao, there is a description of the best kind of leader. It is not the king who commands loudly, or the general who enforces with fear. It is the figure who seems almost invisible, who leads so gently that when the people flourish, they say, "We did it ourselves." This is leadership by not leading, a paradox that confuses at first, yet reveals a deeper wisdom. True influence is not about control, but about creating space where others can rise naturally. The sage does not rush to impose rules or bend others to a will. Instead, the sage listens, waits, and moves with timing as precise as the seasons. Just as spring arrives without proclamation and rivers carve valleys without intention, the leader, guided by Tao, allows change to happen with subtlety. Influence is carried not in speeches, but in presence. By living simply and clearly, the sage sets an example that speaks louder than commands. Control, after all, often breeds resistance. Push too hard, and people push back. Shout too loudly, and voices become defensive. But leave space, and others will step into it. Offer trust, and trust grows. This is the secret of non-leading. It is not laziness or neglect, but an active form of patience, an understanding that guidance works best when it empowers rather than dominates. Imagine a teacher who answers every question before it is asked. Students may learn facts, but never discover understanding for themselves. Now imagine a teacher who offers hints, who allows silence, who waits for the spark of realization to rise in the student's own mind. The lesson in this second classroom stays longer, feels deeper, because it belongs to the learner. Taoist leadership is like this, offering conditions for growth without forcing outcomes. Timing is also essential. A farmer does not pull at shoots to make them grow faster. The task is to water, to clear weeds, to watch the sky, and to wait. The sage leader recognizes the right moment to act and the right moment to step back. In this way, even small gestures become powerful. A word spoken at the right time carries more weight than endless instructions. A single act of integrity shapes a community more than 100 laws. This way of leading may feel strange in a world obsessed with strong figures and constant direction. Yet history often shows that the most enduring changes come not from force, but from quiet catalysts. A leader who trusts the natural intelligence of people, who clears obstacles instead of building walls, who values timing over control, leaves a legacy that outlives speeches and monuments. When the people succeed, they do not feel bound to a master. They feel they have discovered their own strength. This is the highest form of leadership, the leadership of the sage. By not leading in the usual sense, the sage becomes the most effective leader of all, showing that harmony is born not from domination, but from trust, space, and the gentle flow of the Tao. In every marketplace throughout history, people have chased after more. More grain stored in the barn, more coins clinking in the chest, more silk, more land, more security. Yet the Taoist sages looked at this endless pursuit and asked a question that unsettled the fever of accumulation. What if true wealth was not about having more, but about needing less? This was the seed of an economy of enough, a vision of life where contentment matters more than expansion, and freedom comes not from grasping, but from releasing. The Tao Te Ching speaks of simplicity as the root of peace. When desires multiply, the heart becomes restless, never satisfied, always leaning toward the next object. But when desires quiet, the world feels fuller with less. The bowl does not need to overflow to be useful. A modest hut may give more peace than a palace filled with intrigue. This simplicity is not poverty, for poverty is forced. It is sufficiency, a deliberate recognition that what we have can already be enough. Deaccumulation was another radical idea. Instead of piling up endlessly, the sage suggested lightening the load. Just as travelers on a mountain path throw off what weighs them down, so too can the spirit grow lighter by releasing possessions, ambitions, and unnecessary striving. In this release, there is not loss but gain, for space opens where joy and freedom can return. The person who has less to guard, less to fear losing, walks more easily than the one clutching treasures at every step. Wealth, in this Taoist sense, is measured not in numbers but in sufficiency. It is the warmth of having clothes in winter, the relief of food in the belly, the companionship of friends, the steadiness of shelter. Beyond these basics, the chase for more often becomes a chain. A rich man may still feel poor if his heart is never at rest, while a farmer who sings at sunset may feel richer than kings. Enough is not a fixed number, but a state of mind, a recognition that life itself is abundant when not smothered by constant craving. In times of chaos, such as the warring states, this teaching carried even more power. Leaders who pursued endless conquest bled their people dry, while those who practiced restraint and simplicity often created longer-lasting peace. The Taoist voice reminded rulers and villagers alike that overextension leads to collapse, while balance preserves strength. This was not just philosophy, but practical survival, an economy of enough that kept communities resilient. Today, the same whisper remains. In a world of constant advertisements and competition, the Taoist way asks us to pause and notice how much we already carry. To practice sufficiency is to step out of the wheel of endless hunger, to savor what is present, to measure wealth in freedom rather than possessions. When we let go of chasing more, we discover that enough is not a small thing. It is the quiet abundance of life itself, flowing without strain, as natural as the Tao. Stand by the edge of a river and watch closely. The water moves in ways both simple and mysterious. It glides smoothly in one moment, then swirls into eddies the next. A single stone changes its rhythm, a fallen branch alters its path, and yet the whole river keeps flowing forward. This image is not only poetic but scientific. Modern thinkers, studying complexity and chaos, see patterns that Taoist sages spoke of centuries ago. Systems, whether rivers, forests, markets, or societies, do not yield easily to force. They respond through feedback, through emergence, through sudden shifts when conditions reach a tipping point. Flow, more often than force, is what shapes outcomes. Emergence is one of the river's quiet lessons. From droplets gathering into streams to streams joining into rivers, order appears without being commanded. Fish find their paths, plants root along the banks, whole ecosystems arise from countless small interactions. Taoist thought saw this long ago. The Tao was described as the source that generates 10,000 things, not through planning but through natural unfolding. To live wisely in such a world means trusting this emergence, instead of trying to dictate every detail. Feedback is another rhythm. When rains swell the river, its banks overflow, reshaping the land. When drought shrinks it, fields dry and communities adapt. The river answers back to the sky, to the earth, to the creatures that live beside it. So too with human systems. Push too hard in one direction, and consequences ripple back in unexpected ways. The Taoist warning against over-control echoes in the modern recognition that every action creates reactions, often beyond our sight. Then there are the moments of phase change, when a system suddenly shifts. Ice melts into water, water boils into steam, calm rivers surge into floods. These changes seem sudden, but they are the result of gradual build-up reaching a threshold. Taoist sages called this the rhythm of yin and yang, the turning of opposites when one reaches its extreme and becomes the other. In a complex world, wisdom lies in sensing these thresholds, in preparing for transformation instead of clinging to stability. Force may work in the short term, but it often collapses against complexity. A ruler who tries to control every action of the people finds rebellion. A farmer who forces the land without rest finds the soil barren. But flow adapts. Flow listens, bends, and reshapes itself without losing direction. This is why water has always been the Taoist master image. It moves through chaos without needing to conquer it. Modern science, with all its equations and models, circles back to insights carved in bamboo scrolls long ago. Life is complex, the world is dynamic, and the attempt to dominate it often fails. But when we move like the river, adjusting to currents, allowing space for emergence, trusting feedback, and preparing for change, we discover resilience. In complexity, flow is not just survival. It is wisdom, ancient and new, the Tao revealed in the endless motion of water. The mind has a way of tightening when life feels uncertain. In these moments, it feels natural to cling harder, to try to solve or control what hurts. Yet, Taoist wisdom points to a different response, one that sounds soft but proves powerful. It is the psychology of surrender, the practice of loosening the grip, of letting be. Cognitive rigidity is the name given in modern psychology to this tightness of thought. It is the habit of holding on to one explanation, one fear, one way of seeing things, even when it no longer helps. The Taoist sages knew this pattern without naming it. They saw that the more one insists on a fixed path, the more life resists. Just as a tree that refuses to bend in a storm will snap, the mind that refuses to adapt under pressure will break. Surrender is not collapse, but flexibility, the ability to shift, to bow, and to rise again. Attention becomes the key. When grief presses heavily, the mind narrows, focusing only on absence. When anxiety rises, the mind locks onto imagined futures. The Taoist practice is to widen attention, to let thoughts and feelings come and go without forcing them away or chasing after them. Breathing deeply, noticing the sound of wind outside the window, allowing tears to fall without judgment, these small acts open space around the pain. They remind us that sorrow and fear are currents in a larger river, not the whole river itself. Habits of release can be practiced gently. A sigh allowed instead of suppressed. A walk taken without needing to solve every problem. A moment of silence before responding in anger. Each of these is a way of loosening the knots, of teaching the mind and body that not everything requires force. Over time, the habit of release grows stronger, and surrender feels less like giving up and more like returning home. This surrender does not erase grief or anxiety. Taoism never promised escape from life's difficulties. Instead, it offers a way of meeting them without drowning. To let be is to allow sadness to exist without fighting it, to allow fear to rise and fall without letting it rule. In that acceptance lies resilience. The storm passes, the river clears, the heart remembers its strength. In a culture that often demands control and constant fixing, surrender feels radical, yet it is deeply human. It honors that not all wounds heal through effort, some heal through time and gentleness. Not all fears vanish through planning, some soften when held lightly. The psychology of surrender reveals that freedom comes not by mastering every thought, but by releasing the need to master them. To let be is to discover space, even in sorrow. It is to stand in the current of life and trust that movement will return. In the softness of surrender, we find a strength that control could never give, the quiet strength of being carried by the Tao. The world today flows with a new kind of river, one not made of water but of data. Scroll through your phone and you are carried along by endless currents of images, messages, and suggestions shaped by algorithms. These digital streams know how to catch the eye, how to hold attention, how to keep the mind from resting. What once was silence between tasks is now filled with pings and notifications. In this attention market, every glance becomes a commodity. Every pause is quickly occupied. The result is overload, a life where the current rushes too fast and leaves little space for breath. Taoist wisdom offers an antidote, not by rejecting technology, but by remembering how to move with it differently. Just as a boatman on a river learns to steer gently rather than fight the current, we too can learn to place small interruptions into our digital flow. This is the practice of deliberate friction. Turning off notifications for a time, stepping away from the screen, or even pausing before clicking creates space where the mind can rest. These tiny acts slow the torrent enough to allow choice instead of compulsion. Empty intervals are another Taoist remedy. In nature, silence is as important as sound. Night balances day, stillness balances motion. In the digital world, these intervals have been erased, every gap filled with new content. To restore them is to practice the art of Wu Wei in modern form. Let the phone stay on the table during a walk. Allow a meal to pass without a screen nearby. Protect a few minutes before sleep or after waking as untouched space. These pauses act like clearings in the forest, places where the spirit can breathe again. Humane rhythms grow from this practice. Taoism teaches that forcing pace leads to collapse, but moving with natural timing brings resilience. Online life urges constant speed, yet our bodies and minds thrive on cycles of activity and rest. By shaping digital use around rhythm rather than urgency, we recover balance. Work is followed by silence, input is balanced by reflection, presence with others is protected from distraction. Technology does not vanish, but it is placed back into proportion, a tool rather than a master. The digital current is powerful, and it is easy to be swept along without noticing. But Taoist thought reminds us that flow does not mean surrendering to chaos. Flow means aligning with what nourishes life, letting go of excess, and creating space for what matters. By weaving friction, intervals, and rhythm into our relationship with screens, we turn overload into balance. The sages of old watched rivers and clouds to understand the Tao. Today, we must also watch the currents of data. The lesson remains the same. Without pauses, we are carried blindly, but with awareness, we can step lightly, rest often, and let the current serve rather than consume us. In the digital age, as in the age of mountains and rivers, wisdom lies in knowing when to drift, when to steer, and when to step ashore. High mountains rise into the clouds, while rivers cut their paths through valleys below. Forests breathe out air that fills our lungs, and oceans cradle storms that shape the coasts. For much of human history, these landscapes were seen with awe as powers greater than kings and empires. But as time passed, people began to act not as part of these worlds, but as rulers over them, building, extracting, and forcing nature into narrow shapes. Taoist wisdom stands as a reminder that this attitude brings imbalance. The Tao is not conquered, it is lived with. An ecology of reverence invites us to see the earth not as a resource to dominate, but as a partner to move alongside. Wu Wei, the principle of effortless alignment, becomes a guide for conservation. To work with watersheds instead of against them means allowing rivers to meander, wetlands to soak up floods, forests to regrow in their own rhythms. Forcing the land through overbuilding or stripping it bare may yield short-term gains, but leads to long-term collapse. The Taoist way suggests that resilience grows not from control, but from respect. When the farmer plants in harmony with the seasons, the harvest endures. When the builder designs with the contour of the land, the structures last. Consider the story of ancient irrigation in the valleys of China. Instead of dams that blocked rivers, channels were carved that guided water gently into fields. The flow was never stopped, only nudged, allowing the river to continue its path while feeding human life. This was conservation before the word existed, a practice rooted in working with rather than against. Taoist sages saw the wisdom in water's patience and taught that by imitating it, people too could thrive without destroying the balance that sustains them. Reverence is not passive admiration, it is active humility. To walk through a forest and recognize it as alive is to feel responsibility for its care. To watch a mountain stream and hear it as voice rather than noise is to remember dependence. In this way, ecology is not only science but spirit. It asks not only how do we preserve resources, but also how do we live in gratitude with them. Modern life often forgets this. Cities expand, industries consume, and landscapes shrink. Yet the Taoist vision offers a countercurrent. By returning to sufficiency instead of excess, by designing with ecosystems instead of against them, by practicing restraint rather than conquest, humanity can rediscover harmony. Conservation becomes less about rules and more about relationship. An ecology of reverence is not nostalgic fantasy, it is practical wisdom. Rivers will always outlast walls built to cage them. Forests will always outgrow concrete when given time. The Tao will always move beyond human schemes. Our task is not to command but to join, not to master but to learn. In doing so, we rediscover a truth as old as the mountains. Life flows best when it is honored. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to it. A kettle hums softly as water begins to heat. Steam rises in thin curls. The air grows warm, and the world slows down for a moment. Making tea may look like an ordinary act, yet in Taoist thought it becomes something far more. Each step, from boiling to steeping to sipping, is a lesson in patience, presence, and the art of letting life unfold naturally. A cup of tea becomes a lifetime in miniature, a small ceremony that teaches without demanding, that calms without preaching. The heat of the water is the beginning. It cannot be rushed. If the flame is too strong, the water grows harsh. If too weak, it never reaches readiness. In this balance is a lesson about timing. Life, too, asks for patience. Push too hard, and things break. Hold back too much, and growth stalls. Watching water slowly reach the point of bubbling reminds us that change has its own rhythm and cannot be forced. The steeping follows. Leaves unfurl, releasing fragrance and colour into the water. Nothing is added except time and presence. This unfolding mirrors the way our own inner lives open when given space. Thoughts settle, feelings soften, clarity rises slowly. Just as tea leaves reveal their nature without strain, people too reveal their strength when not pressed under constant demand. Steeping is a teacher of trust, showing that transformation happens quietly if we let it. Then comes the act of pouring, a simple gesture that carries grace. The liquid flows from one vessel to another, smooth and steady. To pour tea attentively is to practice generosity, to share warmth without effort. The cup becomes an offering, not just of drink, but of presence. Each sip is an invitation to pause, to taste the moment fully, to be with others or with oneself in ease. Ceremony is often thought of as grand, yet here it is small and intimate. There is no need for elaborate display. The Taoist spirit lives in the simplicity of the act. The sound of water, the fragrance rising, the warmth in the hands, all of these become reminders of connection. Nothing is wasted. Even the pause between sips carries meaning. It is in these pauses that life breathes, just as silence makes music possible. A cup of tea teaches that mindfulness is not separate from daily life. It does not demand special conditions. It asks only that we notice. The patience of waiting, the humility of sharing, the gratitude of tasting, these are not lofty ideals but practical ways of living. To approach each small act with this care is to transform the ordinary into the sacred. When the tea is gone, only the empty cup remains. Yet even emptiness is part of the lesson. The vessel is ready to be filled again, just as life is ready to be lived again in each moment. A cup of tea, in its warmth and silence, reveals that presence is always enough. It is a ceremony that fits in a single hand, yet contains the wisdom of a lifetime. At the beginning of this journey, we met the image of the uncarved block, simple and whole before any shaping. Now we return to it, not as beginners, but as travelers who have wandered through mountains, rivers, gardens, and poems. The circle completes itself here, in the same place where it began, yet everything feels different. The lessons of letting go, of flowing with life instead of forcing it, of trusting softness over hardness, have all led us back to simplicity. Returning is not moving backwards, but realizing that the way has been here all along, quiet, clear, and flowing beneath our feet. Home in the Taoist sense is not a physical house, but a state of being. It is the calm that rises when striving falls away, the ease that appears when perfection is no longer chased. We spend years seeking answers, trying to carve meaning out of experience, pushing for achievement and fearing failure. Yet, when we stop and breathe, when we notice the stillness beneath the noise, we find that the Tao was never distant. It was in the breath, in the silence between words, in the curve of water as it met the shore. Returning means recognizing that we were always carried, even when we thought we were lost. The unhurried nature of this return is part of its beauty. There is no rush to arrive, no deadline to meet. Just as a tree takes its time to grow rings year after year, so too does the journey of living unfold at its own pace. Taoist wisdom teaches that forcing speed only creates resistance, while patience allows life to reveal itself. Coming home is a gentle landing, a settling into what was present from the beginning. Letting go has been the thread through every chapter. We let go of control in wu-wei. We let go of identity in the butterfly's dream. We let go of perfection in the art of surrender. Now we let go of even the journey itself, realizing that all paths return to the same flow. The way is not somewhere else, not in a distant future or hidden mountain, but in the step we take right now. To return is to see with new eyes what was always before us. This return does not mean withdrawal from the world. It means living in it with ease. Drinking tea becomes ceremony. Walking a garden path becomes meditation. Listening to wind in the trees becomes teaching. The everyday shines with quiet radiance once the burden of striving is set down. The way home is the way of presence, of belonging to the moment as it is, uncarved, unhurried, enough. So the circle closes, yet it remains open. The Tao flows endlessly, and we flow with it. To return is not the end of the story, but the realization that there was never a separation at all. The way has always been here, waiting in silence, offering its calm. Coming home is simply remembering, and in remembering, resting in the endless simplicity of being.